And to discuss the roadmap for India's green transition, we have a visionary who's literally building the infrastructure of tomorrow. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Praveen Parapati, Chairman of Swachh Bio Solutions, a leader at the forefront of the bioeconomy, driving innovations in clean energy and circular solutions to ensure that India's growth is as clean as it's consistent. We have of course, Dr. Vibha Dhawan, Director General Terry. Both of you, please take your seats. We also have Avinash Mohanty, Global Sector Head, CCS IPE Global. Huge round of applause for Mr. Mohanty. And moderating this critical dialogue is my colleague and friend, Kartik Malhotra.
Thank you, Krishna. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to be the last one standing between you and your lunch, so we'll try and keep it as quick and as insightful and as meaningful as we can. And I think it's pretty much an extension of Dr. Vibha Dhawan, the energy conundrum. I think the only conundrum for me is going to be to continue matching the energy levels of Dr. Puri, who was here before us. But I think, yeah, Krishna just said it, and it's absolutely the right moment to be having these conversations, because right now, I last checked a few seconds ago, Brent was trading at about $108 a barrel. We've seen the kind of havoc which has been caused across energy markets in the world. India has not been isolated from whatever we are seeing unfold in the conflict in West Asia. And I think the conversation around energy security cannot be better timed than today and right here. So the first obvious concern that sparks out is what happens if there is no petrol? What happens if our energy shipments are stuck and we cannot get enough crude? And what if we still get some crude and the prices are so high that nobody can afford to fill them in? And that made me research, and I discovered one country which is pretty much doing absolutely all right in the absence of these energy shocks. And that happens to be the country of Brazil. And Brazil has got about 90% of flex fuel vehicles in the world. In fact, 60 to 70% of its own fleet runs on flex fuel. And what is this flex fuel? This flex fuel is something that we were discussing just some time back. It goes by the chemical formula of C2H6O. And that's nothing but ethanol. So, Mr. Parapati, let me first begin by asking you, the solution has been staring us in our face all along. Ethanol, flex fuel, reduces our energy dependence, and yet it doesn't seem to enter mainstream automobile engineering in India just as yet. Why?
I think it's starting to.
It's starting to. I believe Maruti Suzuki is going to launch its first model this year. Volkswagen, a few other companies will. But Brazil did it in 1975. We are here in 2026. What has been the apprehension across stakeholders to ensure that this solution becomes viable for India?
I think the innovative drive to innovate and change, there's a lot of inertia in the system. Okay? Even now you see that. We have had good relations with the Gulf countries, and they have been supplying crude. And you have a system that is already running. And trying to change that, it's a $1 trillion economy, okay? Trying to do something different means you get in the way, or you're changing a lot of things that are already in place, okay? So unless you see some shocks like this, that actually let people think about what the situation is and how to make it more robust, changes may not be very easy. Now, okay. All that said, the 20% blending target that India has reached, many people thought that couldn't be done. There are quite a few reports that would say, I don't think it will be possible for another 2-3 years. But the government has stayed with it, and the sugar industry has cooperated, farmers have cooperated. But the food way of doing things, for instance, taking sugars or taking grains and trying to make energy from there, has limited potential.
Okay, we will try and talk about how that limited potential can become unlimited in terms of India's opportunity. But Dr. Dhawan, E20, yeah, I mean, it rolls out now, but is E20 enough? Because you have Brazil, which is doing as much as E85. So is E20 enough for India? And what will it take for India to actually think about its fuel mix going beyond this 20% to offset the energy conundrum that you were talking about earlier?
Well, to answer your question and what you asked initially, that why Brazil was able to do it, and I'll say there was a lot of resistance even in accepting E20.
Resistance by automakers primarily?
No, so I'll just come to it. So one of the big problems with us is that we are adverse to change, and therefore petroleum comes, we use it, we don't even understand what it is costing to the country. The second is, and you all will remember, because when ethanol became a reality, in India we started this debate on food versus fuel. And therefore, instead of thinking, how do we increase productivity, we only relied on what kind of agriculture residue can be converted into ethanol. Now, let's also understand the entire conversion of ethanol is based on how much of sugar is there. So if you start with lignocellulosic biomass, the conversion cost, the cost of production is going to be far higher than if you start with grain or sugarcane juice, where the carbon molecules are far greater. So therefore, cost became one of the inhibitors.
I'm glad I read up the formula, carbon molecules, right? The C2860 is beginning to make some sense.
Exactly. So that is where it is that the cost of production of ethanol was comparatively higher. And somewhere, maybe I'm wrong, it is that the excise, the government is also able to attract on traditional fuels, while in case of ethanol, they actually had to subsidize. But the harsh reality remains that we don't have foreign reserves, or rather we should be sufficient, energy sufficiency has to be there. And that is what we all realized. Then came that, in a way, we need to oppose, and we also need to be very, very sensitive what's going to happen. And that's why E20, it was, perhaps it's going to spoil our engines, maintenance cost is going to go up. And we also have to be very transparent in terms of, is there going to be any decline in terms of the average I'm going to get on my car? Let's also be very calculative. There are different aspects. One is energy self-sufficiency. The other is the emission, CO2 emission. And I don't have to calculate CO2 emissions based on per liter of oil or ethanol. I have to calculate it on per kilometer basis. So that transparency, if it is not told properly, people start talking against it. The entire thing, and that is what I'll also come to ethanol production, and especially the countries which are converting maize into ethanol, there also we have to look into the total carbon footprint of it. Because we all tend to calculate what are the emissions. We don't calculate emissions at the level of producing corn, converting into ethanol. So therefore, those all calculations are to be brought, they are there. It's only that you need to bring them out in open and tell the customer what it costs. As a country, I'll say, apart from using waste, we should also go towards, or right now it is ethanol conversion is from the agriculture residue, including sugarcane, bagasse, and so on. But we are still, and the grain which has gone bad, we are still not raising crops for the sake of ethanol conversion.
But that is the bedrock of the fuel versus food debate, isn't it, ma'am? I think, you know, the conundrum really is that if you just focus on food grains, which are going to get converted to fuel, then there's a food scarcity which could potentially build in.
Yeah. No, but then you don't have to see food. I'm not at all saying that it's food versus fuel. It is increase your productivity. And there are, and in fact, this particular war has also brought another thing into play, and that is, will it going to impact food security because fertilizer is in short supply now? But why don't we look into all the alternatives? You have nano fertilizer available now. and which gives you, of course, I'll like to be as truthful as possible, because yes, nano, your consumption at a certain stage is only 10%. Like, you have to spray it on the leaves. But till the time you have expended leaves, you have to depend on usual fertilizer. Now, what is happening is, and that's where all the ministries have to sit down together and look into, can I give subsidy on nano fertilizer as well? Because farmer is saying, what's there for me? Why should I change? I get 90% subsidy on urea. So then somewhere they also have to look into carbon markets. They have to ensure that all these technologies are adopted. I also mentioned about that you need to have cold storage. Today, India loses 35% of the total production. If that 35% of perishables, of grains, those are available in the market by following right practices, you have 35% more food that can be converted into ethanol.
Fair enough. Mr. Mohanty, I'll come to you in just a bit. I want to bring in Mr. Parapati again, because this entire food versus fuel debate, of course, Dr. Dhawan is saying that overall productivity must increase and nano-fertilizers should perhaps be a solution, an answer to that challenge. But I think the technology that you at Swachh Bio are using does not require productivity of food to actually go up, because it's completely the waste produce of the farm which is actually getting converted into ethanol. How's your technology different from what is already in practice?
So basically the first thing that we thought about in trying to see what type of renewables we can develop are, if we do it from the food side, there is an impact, but there is a whole lot of biomass that is left. In fact, if you weigh how much waste is there versus how much food is there, the grains weigh about the same, or 0.8 times the amount of biomass that is left over on the crop. Okay? So there is tremendous amount of material that is left over. And as Mr. Ramkumar was saying in the previous panel, about 230 million tons of surplus material. The total material is about 750 million tons of biomass. And of that, at least 230 is supposed to be available. That itself, if we take it and convert, you're going to be meeting at least 50% of the nation's needs. And if we optimize the vehicles to take advantage of ethanol, then you can get even better. So one of the things that happens quite frequently is this thing about ethanol not having as much energy density as gasoline. Okay, and so there may be some loss of mileage, etc., when you drive. That's true. Ethanol has 1/3 less. Okay. But ethanol is a single molecule, and so the internal combustion engines can burn that a lot more efficiently. So even though the energy is a lot less, the mileage doesn't drop that much if you're able to actually tune the engine properly. So there's a lot of fine-tuning that needs to be done, and hopefully the manufacturers will catch up with that.
Right, so let's talk about the manufacturers. And Mr. Mohanty, let me bring you in, because Dr. Vibha Dhawan was saying there's been resistance, and Mr. Parapati is saying that the manufacturers will hopefully, tweak the engines to ensure that that ethanol blend becomes a very viable option for India. But what has been the resistance so far beyond manufacturers just not wanting to invest more in capex and designing new engines? Because for the customer, even if the mileage reduces, as long as the fuel comes cheap, there should not be any resistance.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And at the onset, many congratulations to TV9 and News9 for pivoting the issue of energy, climate change off late on a regular basis. But coming back to the larger green pivot story, that's where the story of Atmanirbharta, that is what is the story of Viksit Bharat comes aligned, right? To your question of what is the resistance, there are three kinds of resistance. First is a systemic resistance. Now we need to understand that demand and supply, because largely why India...
I'm looking at it as an alternative to petrol. So as much demand and supply of petrol is there, in fact, supply will only increase. Demand at best will stay the same.
So the demand still stays there, but in terms of supply and in terms of adaptability, that's where the question comes in. Those cost-benefit analysis need to be looked at more from a home budget. Now, if you're looking at a user kind of perspective, if I'm going to save as an individual family, say some money in terms of adopting to a blended fuel, then probably I'll be more interested. But who is going to tell me that story, right? Number one. The same pivots have been happening for a larger time within our health sector. When we adopted, we went into the larger kind of technologies, and that is why India could become one of the affordable healthcare capitals of the world. Similarly, if you really have to become a renewable energy capital where the green pivot is a business as usual, you need to change that narrative, number one. And coming back to the manufacturers, today the manufacturers know what has to be done, but is there a market for it? That's where...
Or are they the right incentives?
Only incentives.
Why are there not enough incentives for flex fuel like there are for electric mobility?
Absolutely. Only incentives are not going to support this. It has to be self-sustainable. Anything which is riding on an incentive, is riding on a subsidy, is still external dependent. And today, if you don't have an exchequer, then you are not going to promote that. So that's where the AAA of any technology comes into picture in terms of availability, in terms of affordability, and more importantly, in terms of accessibility. And that's where the green pivot story remains, because through this, what is going to happen is, are we going to create more jobs? Is it a growth narrative which has been supplemented? Is it a sustainability story that we are relying, which is homegrown? And that's where the nexus between the public and private sector becomes very important. Because some of these, what we are talking about, are at a pilot scale. The plants that have been put down, especially for a stubble burning. Now, stubble burning is always seen as a crime scene.
Doesn't this partly take care of stubble burning as well? Doesn't flex fuel and ethanol production take care of all the stubble which is left behind, because that's the residue which is going to get converted into fuel?
Absolutely. And there are many of these pilots which are available. We need to understand which pilot works and which pilot do not work and which pilot can actually be scaled. Now, once you have that scalability factor coming in, then I think this shift in the behavior will come automatically, because if as an end consumer, I'm going to pay lesser, even if my mileage is getting impacted, I'll be okay with it, rather than paying higher and having a higher mileage. And that higher mileage is always an minimal story that we are talking about.
Absolutely. Dr. Vibha, let me bring you back into this conversation. And I think as far as Indian OEMs are concerned, the innovation story has been fairly robust. On average, the tailpipe emissions per vehicle in India are much lower than what you see in vehicles in the US, in Germany, even countries in West Asia emit a lot more, because obviously the fuel is cheaper and they are sort of, big SUVs which are guzzlers in any case. But the tailpipe emissions on average are much more efficient in India and in China. And yet we feel that this resistance to ethanol as a mix has got to do a little bit with the policy incentives being there for electric vehicles, not be there for flex fuel. I don't think the apprehensions would go away on their own unless there is a little bit of nudge that the government gives the OEMs.
You're absolutely right, and that's where you need to change the mindset of people. It is, why should I change? Am I saving money? That's a usual attitude.
But mindset of the people or mindset of the manufacturers, ma'am?
No, I'll say mindset of the people, because you have to create market. As a responsible citizen, I should simply ask for flex fuel. I should rather go to the petrol pump. And the other thing, which, in fact, the point which you were making and what is there for me, I suppose now with this particular war, the price of crude is going to go up. And that's where actually the bioethanol is going to be cheaper. And
no doubt, but are we ready? Are we ready to exploit that cost difference? Because we haven't really prioritized flex fuel.
No, but we have, because that is where we should now move from. Rather, see, look at it. If we are not getting fossil petrol today, fossil fuel today, at least even today, our consumption is 10–15% lower than what it would have been otherwise. And we should move more towards E30 or that sort of scenario, wherever you don't need to change the engine, how much can I go towards it? Let's also look at, because it's not choice. Now, the sustainable aviation fuel is coming in a big way, and it is for all international airlines. There has to be 5% blending. That's also going to come from bioethanol. So, and then somehow we look things in isolation. When we are talking of, why can't there be a carbon tax? If I'm putting petrol and there is carbon tax, which actually is required because I'm polluting the environment. We again talk of stubble burning again and again, and we want to blame the poor farmer. What percentage of emissions is it causing? Not even 2%. And therefore, while we tell the farmer, don't burn your parali,
What's he going to do with it? Where is the infrastructure for him to do anything else?
He has equal right to ask me, you are also driving a car, how much are you polluting the environment? So therefore, and then when I say we work in isolation, do we have the right set of research done? What kind of microbes I require? Even for degradation of lignin, and again, I'll come back to the point which was made, that we have lots and lots of biomass, but it is all lignified. So to break lignin, you require quite a bit of enzymatic action. And those enzymes are expensive. So let's also research on how do we bring down the cost of ethanol. And that's going to change the scenario.
Absolutely. And we are running out of time, but I really want to, not leave behind that aspect, Mr. Parapati, which I want to come to now, which is about, are our priorities aligned? Because if we are looking at, let's say, incentivizing electric mobility, for which there is battery dependence on China, for which there is recharging plants, dependability on thermal power, coal, pollution, then the 30% target of India's fleet being electric by 2030, should that not have been 30%, maybe 50% being alternate fuels, including flex fuels? And can something be done, or is it too late?
India is largely an agricultural society. Ignoring the farmers and farming, to me, means the country is ignoring the majority of the people. Okay. So we have to work in a way that actually helps the farmers increase their remuneration, and something like ethanol, something like generating value from lignin, like producing diesel from lignin, etc., is actually the way to go, where you can replace not just the gasoline content, but also the diesel content. And that, to me, is the way to go, and I'm happy to say we have been working at this for 20 years, and we believe we have a solution for that.
All right, so wishing you, Swachh Bio, all the very best, and we hope that the product finds a market fit. And at this moment, I will also thank Mr. Mohanty and Dr. Vibha Dhawan for being here. Thank you so much for all of you to spend this time and really help us make sense of the flex fuel story and where India is headed. Mr.